India, till date, did not have a dedicated law on data protection. And that's the reason why an urgent need was felt that India must have a law that can help protect, preserve personal data in the data economy ecosystem. Now, it's gone ahead and defined different categories of stakeholders, whether it's data principals, data fiduciaries, or data processors, and has gone ahead to provide for an unprecedented fining regime in the country, in the sense that should you go ahead and contravene the provisions of the law, you could actually be exposed to fines up to 250 crore rupees per one contravention. So, that being the case, this is expected to be a game changing legislation. This legislation has still not come into force at the time when we talk. So, once these rules are finalized and they are implemented and the law gets implemented, we're going to see a new game changing legislation that promises to not just protect personal data of Indians, but more significantly, also provide for a robust, sound, secure, and resilient data economy in the country. The Indian DPDP Act has been tremendously influenced and inspired by the General Data Protection Regulation, or the GDPR of the European Union, except that we have sought to come up with a law that's not just a cut copy paste, but a law that's been customized according to the existing ground realities in the country. In contradistinction, when I look at the Indian ecosystem, I find that the concept of protection of data was virtually non existent in India. The reason for this is that in India, people have still the impression that they can copy anybody's data, use it, monetize it without any kind of a fear of the consequences of law. So, for the first time, once now the DPDP Act comes up, there will be a semblance of a detailed legal framework to protect data. The Indian DPDP Act marks and breaks new ground as far as the data protection legislation in India is concerned. To that extent, it's different from the GDPR. Let's quickly realize it that GDPR is a mature model. It's been with us for the last many years, and there is now substantial jurisprudence on GDPR. But in the context of the DPDP Act, once the said legislation comes into being, then to a large extent, we'll have to wait and see how the jurisprudence is going to evolve. Because in India, people still don't have respect for data, personal data of persons, or the protection or related aspects. We have to be also mindful of the fact that India does not have a dedicated law on cybersecurity. So consequently, we find that it's a very different kind of an ecosystem wherein you are now trying to sow in seeds of data protection. How they will actually flower, how they will actually go ahead and get more successful in the coming times is something that only time will be able to tell. The DPDP promises to impact almost all sectors of business in India. There's not going to be a single sector that will be left outside the ambit, scope, applicability, or impact of the Digital Personal Data Protection Act. We can actually have common minimum standards of harmonization as far as data protection is concerned. And I think that's what the origin is. Everybody is going to be impacted. Yes, you have to be mindful of the fact that the government will have the power to go ahead and exempt certain entities from the applicability of the DPDP Act. But even if they are exempt, they will still be required to ensure compliance with the parameters of cybersecurity and other parameters of data protection. So, all said and done, it's going to impact everyone. Well, as of now, the law stands that the 250 crore rupees fine can be imposed on any entity or an individual who's found to be violating or contravening the provisions of the DPDP Act. So everybody in the ecosystem have to tighten their belts and have to specifically keep in mind the need for proactively complying with the DPDP Act and the draft DPDP rules as and when they are notified and implemented by the central government. Almost all sectors in India are going to face massive challenges in the implementation of the DPDP Act. The reason for this is not very far to find out. This is so because the DPDP Act is a generic legislation. The DPDP Act comes up with a new concept of reasonable security safeguards, which is a much bigger, broader, and a comprehensive term. However, it includes not just security protocols, but also encryption mechanisms. But we have to realize that in this data ecosystem, one size fit all is not going to be the approach. Why? Because the requirements for security and encryption, maybe in banking and financial sectors, would be completely different from that in retail and manufacturing. So you will have to come up with sector specific guidelines vis-a-vis security and reasonable security safeguards. Once you give this detailed notice, and once the data principal consents to the notice by giving his crystal clear, free, unequivocal consent, then in such a scenario, you will be entitled to go ahead and use, collect, or process data, personal data of the said data principal, otherwise not. You don't comply with this law, and this Damocles sword of 250 crore rupees fine is going to be hanging on your head all the time. Also, even when you comply with the law, you still don't know at what point of time your actions could tantamount to contraventions under the DPDP Act, which then could still expose you to fines ranging from 50 crore rupees to 250 crore rupees. So, a lot of work is required to be done by the data stakeholders in order to be on the right side of the law and in order to ensure that they do not have to face these unprecedented fines up to 250 crore rupees per one contravention.